everyone. I'm Hayley Clover, and welcome to another episode of CMO Weekly, the podcast brought to you by Open Fortune. Open Fortune has changed marketing forever by putting branded ads into fortune cookies and distributing them through over 100,000 restaurants in 30 countries worldwide. In a world where consumers are seeing 3,000 to 5,000 ads a day, Open Fortune is helping burn your brand into their memory. So thanks to Open Fortune for making this possible. All right, let's get started. Today's guest knows how to turn scrolls into signups and odds into opportunity. Adam Baylis is the marketing director at Smarkets, the company behind SBK, a sportsbook built for the data-savvy bettor, and the Smarkets Exchange, one of the most advanced peer-to-peer betting platforms in the world. With a background from Patty Power Betfair, the Jockey Club, Adam brings a deep understanding of how to grow brands in a fast-moving, highly regulated space. He's led CRM overhauls, SEO-first content strategies, and customer marketing that doesn't just drive acquisition, but builds loyalty. From brand building to odds making, Adam's here to talk about what it takes to win in one of the most competitive industries out there. Adam, welcome to the show.
Thanks a lot for having me, Hayley. Really looking forward to having a chat.
Yeah, me too. I always love to start kind of before we dive into the actual marketing strategy currently and what you're doing at Smarkets. How did you end up in the gaming space? Tell us a little bit about your early career.
Yeah, good question. I suppose I sort of worked in music many moons ago, moonlighting as a kind of concert promoter and tour promoter. So nothing near iGaming. That was sort of more in the advent of MySpace, if you remember MySpace, Tom in his heyday.
Oh yeah, of course. I had a top 8.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's interesting in so much as like that kind of gave me sort of a fairly strong grounding, I suppose, in the marketing space. So I was running my own business at that time, and then off the back of that, when the sort of MySpace revolution sort of fell away, so to speak, I kind of moved into helping out startups and doing a bit of consultancy. Did a few bits for some startup pools betting companies, and then ended up at Patty Power Betfair off the back of that.
Cool. Were you big into the, betting yourself? Was that something that you did, kind of on the side while you were running your business, just for fun?
Yeah, it was more just through chance. I mean, yeah, I've always sort of been a recreational user of the products, but I mean, this was many moons ago, and I mean, you mentioned at the intro there sort of how highly regulated the space is now. It was just, thinking back, it was just a very different world.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about that. Like, what are those big changes that you've seen kind of from when you started till now?
Yeah, for sure. So I suppose, affordability checks are still kind of the buzzwords on everyone's lips, and they're still super important. We're kind of dealing, I suppose, today with the sort of the fallout of them being a thing for a couple of years now. And that's obviously primarily in the UK market. I mean, the US is very interesting in so much as it just hasn't got that same level of regulation that we have here in the UK, and that's definitely going to be coming. But yeah, we deal with it day to day as we have done. Smarkets is a bit of a different beast in so much as we don't, because we're sort of sports betting only. It doesn't necessarily impact us in the same way that it might impact other operators. But there are still kind of challenges every day.
Yeah, talk to me a little bit about those challenges, and then we'll kind of dive into, the current strategy right now. When you're going into the Monday morning meeting, right, and there's the team is talking about the big kind of hurdles that you have right now. What are a couple of those things?
So I suppose kind of to talk to it through the Smarkets lens. So Smarkets is one of the biggest kind of betting exchanges in the UK, but a big portion of our user base is what we would call match bettors. So users that are effectively kind of taking advantage, so to speak, of other bookie offers or boosts or promotions with other operators. Because they're effectively, if you are a match bettor, you'll require a fairly sizable bankroll to kind of be utilizing those promotions and taking advantage of them all the time in order to kind of eke out a profit over a longer period of time. That is just naturally going to mean that you're going to trigger more affordability checks. And I don't know, without kind of pouring scorn on the structure of these affordability checks, that's necessarily kind of taken into account for what is a fairly kind of large segment of the kind of recreational gambling user space in the UK.
I gotcha. So, when we're starting to kind of look at how you tell a story for Smarkets and you're talking to your consumer base, with my research, Smarkets obviously being a very data savvy brand, using data to inform all of the decisions that these bettors can make. How do you come up with that story telling for maybe the consumer that you want to bring in that doesn't necessarily understand that side of it, or really only understands kind of the high level sports betting?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Smarkets is an interesting one. It's very much a sort of product in transition. I mean, I don't think anyone will kind of shy away from the fact that betting exchanges, certainly in the UK market, aren't kind of enjoying the best time of things at the moment. You know, Smarkets, when it was sort of, I don't know, 10 years or so ago when it was at its advent, politics and current affairs was a big gateway market for us. So, you know, we were and kind of continue to be one of the leading platforms for political betting and current affairs betting in the UK. So that was a massive kind of acquisition source for a while. And it's really interesting because obviously that's a very buzzy space in the US at the moment with the likes of Polymarket and Kalshi. And I don't know that people necessarily understand that, you know, that's been kind of business as usual for us in the UK for quite a long period of time. You know, people have been pouring millions of pounds into these markets. So yeah, it's not a new thing for us in that sense.
So for me, let's call me a very remedial bettor in terms of my understanding. Explain what that means a little bit when you say political betting. Are people legitimately betting on what will happen in the political market in the UK?
Yeah, absolutely. In the UK, in the US, I mean, like the US election markets would be, you know, one of our biggest sort of busiest markets of the yeah, exactly, of the last couple of decades. So yeah, it's you can bet on that. You can bet on local elections. You know, all sorts.
Wow, that's crazy. And you find that that's one of the most popular forms of betting that people are doing on the app?
Certainly for Smarkets, it's been incredibly popular over the years. Like I say, we tried to kind of carve out a bit of a niche certainly from a marketing and acquisition strategy around it. So yeah, that was certainly one of our big kind of cornerstones to the product.
I think that's so cool. I mean, it makes sense, especially when you talk to people that are making prop bets for sports or making bets kind of on all of those random things. Why wouldn't you bet on political, events and who's going to be elected and all that stuff? It's really fun.
No, totally. And it's kind of, it's slightly in contrast to, I mean, you mentioned at the intro there, we have the SBK product under the kind of the parent umbrella, and SBK is very much a more kind of recreational sportsbook product, and it would kind of veer away from the political betting side of things. It is much more traditional in that sense.
That's cool. So let's talk a little bit about your current marketing strategy and how you're talking to consumers, and maybe to get to where we are now, it kind of helps to go back a little bit. When you started at Smarkets, what was the strategy then, and has it changed much over the last few years?
Oh yeah. So I mean, there are kind of two lenses you kind of have to look at it through, because we have the two products. So Smarkets is obviously the betting exchange, which talks to a very, very different audience to SBK. So you kind of have to apply different tactics to both of them. But I suppose to take a step back, certainly in my career, a massive kind of pivot point has been COVID, right? And, marketing changed dramatically, certainly, speaking to a kind of UK and Ireland market off the back of that, in so much as, prior to COVID, more traditional through the line marketing was very prevalent. There was a lot of spend through linear TV, that sort of stuff. Whereas post-COVID, everyone's pouring money into performance now. You see some of the advances that Google have made with the likes of Performance Max and that sort of stuff. Like that's the kind of buzzier area for people. And I totally get that. And, from a personal kind of marketing strategic point, I don't know that I would necessarily be veering towards pouring money into channels like linear TV and radio and that sort of stuff, having seen the pickup that we have in kind of performance areas.
Yeah. So we're looking at performance marketing, currently, and explain a little bit about the background there. Is it truly just, we need to know exactly how things are going to work right now, and we're not willing to kind of take the chance and more maybe experiential type of marketing, or what's the exact reason behind that?
Yeah, I think, there's definitely a place for that kind of more top of the funnel awareness stuff. And we definitely don't shy away from that. But I suppose, from a strategic point of view with SBK, which is a more kind of, I suppose, let's call it a more customer friendly product, we like to kind of have a top of the funnel focus, but only in a sort of specific kind of community driven environment, if that makes sense. So we'll kind of have we'll have kind of blanket campaigns that will sort of pick up on more, generic customer terms, generic customer targeting in relation to iGaming. But we certainly like to focus on specific areas of the country where we think we can kind of get into the kind of community angle. And I, from a personal perspective, I'm a massive fan of sport partnerships, ambassador partnerships, that sort of stuff. I think it's a really underutilized angle. And when I say that, people will kind of look at me and say, "Well, hey, gambling, it's on the front of loads of soccer, football shirts and that sort of stuff." But I don't think people are looking at it in a deeper way that they should be in terms of kind of fan and community engagement and trying to get product buy-in, because the iGaming space in the UK market is incredibly convoluted, right? We're all kind of fighting for share of wallet, and I'm not under any illusions. Like we're not necessarily going to be the primary betting product for everyone, but like I say, it's about that share of wallet, and it's about kind of getting that brand and USP buy-in, which I think you can only really do when you kind of connect with people at a community level. And I think partnerships are an unbelievably positive way to do that.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about partnerships. Are there any specifically right now, whether it's Smarkets or SBK, that you're like absolutely loving, a partnership that you just launched or that you're working on right now? If you can talk about any of those.
Yeah, for sure. There's quite a bit I can't talk about because we're sort of in between seasons, like soccer seasons. But it was interesting, when SBK kind of got launched to the UK market, we looked at horse racing very closely because one of the USPs of the product is that we offer best odds and best price. And, the price sensitive customer is very kind of closely aligned with racing. But I would probably talk a bit about a partnership with Hibernian, who are kind of one of the biggest soccer or football teams in Scotland. Now, we sort of dug a bit deeper into our customer database in the last sort of 12, 24 months. And there's kind of been a slow kind of upward trajectory in acquisition in Scotland. So we sort of thought, right, let's really try and build on that. So we struck up a partnership with Hibs last season, and that's been incredibly positive in so much as, there are specific areas of Scotland off the back of that now that are, within our top 10 sources of customer acquisition. Oh, wow. for the product. And that's kind of underpinned with content partnerships in the area. So we like to work with kind of localized podcasts or YouTube channels and that sort of stuff, because again, it's about just trying to have a kind of multi-pronged community approach to the acquisition funnel, really.
Yeah. Would you say that going after markets that were not necessarily your top performers is something that you all have always done? Or was it usually, let's stick with the markets we know are performing well, put a lot of our money there, and just continue to, hone that group of people instead of doing what you just talked about and going to Scotland and saying, we really need to get new people into the funnel here from these areas?
Yeah, I think it's probably a byproduct of who we are and where we are as a business. Like I say, we're still fundamentally a startup, right? Like we don't have a Bet365 budget to kind of commit to 2 or 3 large scale through the line campaigns and really kind of blanket acquisition and awareness across the year. So we sort of have to pick our battles, and that kind of community targeting is certainly something that I think works much, much better for us and it's a much more fruitful source of acquisition.
Yeah, and it sounds like your strategy of being in this very busy space, very busy industry, is taking that community first approach and trying to be what feels very local to the areas that you're in.
Yeah, for sure. And a big part of the product is getting buy-in, I suppose, at a really sort of engaged level. The USP is around the fact that like we don't do casino, we don't do slots, we don't do bingo. Like we certainly like to think of ourselves as a more sort of ethical, quote unquote, operator. We're sports betting for sports fans, and it's really nice to be able to get down to that fan level and tell that story in a space where kind of gambling gets quite a bad rep. It's we're kind of for the supporters in that sense.
Yeah, tell me a little bit about whether it's Smarkets or SBK. Are there specific features that you love about your product that are very different than some of the offerings from some of your competitors that you would, tell the listeners of this podcast, like this would be a couple of reasons why you should come over here and use us for your sports betting and your analytics needs?
Yeah, we're turning this into a sort of bit of a marketing campaign in itself, right? But like,
Yeah.
I would dig back into what I've kind of mentioned already, that, the whole kind of best odds messaging is just like, is so saturated within the market. But like, I would encourage anyone and listen to this podcast to download SBK or try Smarkets, because, our mission is to try and bring margin and bring fees right down. And we genuinely have some of the best odds and best prices in the market. And we have quite a neat feature in there around price comparison, where, we show you when we are the best price, and we also highlight when other operators are the best price, because it kind of underlines that ethical and sort of commitment to fairness within the product. And I suppose latterly, again, that point around kind of being ethical, I kind of have the benefit of hindsight, having not necessarily worked behind enemy lines, but like I had a long tenure at Patty Power and Betfair, so I have worked on the other side of it. And certainly as a sort of sports nut myself, like engaging with a product that is built and nurtured by people that love what they do and truly love sports and want to give the best possible sports betting experience to the customer, like that's something that I am really engaged with, and I want other people to be really engaged with at that level.
Yeah, I think you hit a good point there, is, spending a lot of time within your own product, how important that is to be able to obviously market that to consumers. Can you tell me, a couple of things that you do as a marketer that you think helps you continue to kind of level up within your own job? A lot of our listeners are marketing professionals or early marketers that are hoping to have a long marketing career and continue to kind of grow that corporate ladder. But what are some of those things that you're doing to help you continue to get better as a marketing professional?
I'm trying to answer this without being too kind of cliche or hallmark, I suppose, but like a big, I suppose, almost, if you were going to talk about leadership style or how I would run a team and that sort of stuff, like I would never expect anyone or a direct report to do anything that I can't do myself, right? So again, like we talked a bit about performance marketing and the constant way that space is evolving with the likes of PMAX and that sort of stuff coming through. Like I would never necessarily expect anyone in the team to be able to build a campaign or do something that I kind of haven't done and couldn't do myself. And I think as marketers, we're kind of quite guilty of spending half of a week at conferences or like webinars or seminars and that sort of stuff. And, that's great. That's really good. But like, basically there isn't any substitute for just getting your hands dirty, getting in the trenches and just building this stuff yourself and getting your head around it. And it goes a bit back to your point on the product side, away from marketing within our business, we really, really hate using external focus groups or agencies. Like we'll kind of take time out of the day to kind of all sit down as a business for a couple of hours and have everyone in the product, give people kind of test accounts and that sort of stuff to just find any bugs internally, because, it's better that the engineers and the marketers or whoever within the business is in that product every day, knows it and loves it. And I think that kind of comes through from a marketing point of view as well. I think it's important to kind of remain in the trenches at all times. Yeah,
I completely agree. Otherwise, I feel like you're just disconnected to the product and how people are probably talking about your product. Are you on social media a lot, whether it's looking at your actual Smarkets or SBK accounts, or even just like from your personal account? Are you following along with all those things and all the comments that people are posting?
Yeah, it's super guilty. Yeah, you try not to kind of try not to get too bogged down in it, and follow accounts that are more for kind of. Yeah, it is totally. I think it comes down to how good you are at switching off and that sort of stuff. But yeah.
Yeah, well, do you ever look at it from a lens too, where it is a learning tool for you? Like, do you like seeing how the consumers are talking about you to the point where it really does create some type of change if something is not being spoken about in the right way? Or is it more of like okay, well, we need to give it some time. They have to learn it a little bit better. Like, I'm not going to take that comment too personally.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I suppose within this business, again, because we kind of have that startup mentality, I think we do take that stuff very personally and very seriously. I would say, if there's a raft of poor app store reviews over a weekend or something like that, when we all sit down on a Monday morning, you can kind of guarantee that there's some changes getting made to the product roadmap off the back of it, right? So, yeah, I think it's going to be very sort of company dependent, but certainly, we and I take that stuff probably a little bit too seriously at times, but we are kind of product and marketing obsessed in that sense. So yeah, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I mean, if you kind of rest on your laurels, certainly within marketing the space, and the mix is moving so quickly these days that you might just find that you do get caught out.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think it's important to understand how people are perceiving you, talking about you. And, like you said, if there is something that somebody caught that you all just happen to not catch as a team, like, why would that be a negative? Great, we caught it. Now we can fix it and move on.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So where do you see, your two products kind of moving in the next 5 years? Is there a long-term roadmap that you all go over, or because this is such a regulated space where things are changing, is it more kind of month to month, year by year of an overlook?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. So I suppose, Smarkets is very much a product in transition. There's a lot of work going on in the background on that, and yeah, I think it's just a really exciting space. There's a lot going on in terms of, I think betting exchanges in general are going to need to kind of look very closely internally if they are to kind of quote unquote survive. That's a bit dramatic, but I think look at products like Polymarket and Robinhood. Robinhood are doing sports now. Like, their product is incredible. Like, it's awesome. I've definitely been a sort of big user and big advocate of that. So yeah, certainly we're looking kind of internally at what we can do there so we don't get caught out. And SBK kind of just goes from strength to strength, really. There's a lot of untapped acquisition, a lot of untapped customers, certainly for us in the UK. So we'll kind of continue to beaver away at that. It's a slightly weird kind of roadmap at the moment, in so much as the World Cup next year creates this sort of, we've almost been on this weird kind of 18-month roadmap rather than a kind of traditional calendar year one. So yeah, we're kind of constantly evolving and looking at that, because together with, we have the Cheltenham Festival here in the UK, which is like a kind of big horse racing festival every year in March for a week. And that traditionally for all operators is like the big source of acquisition for the year. But with the World Cup as well, that's potentially even bigger than that. And it's sort of a second spike point for the year. So we're really just looking at how we can take advantage of that, as well as moving into other markets. We launched SBK in Sweden at the back end of last year, which is really cool. And we're live in a couple of states in the US and looking at other options there as well. So lots to look forward to.
That's awesome. Do you have somebody on your team, this is just even from my personal knowledge, that's literally following the world calendar of sporting events? Like, there's got to be, I feel like, a dedicated person, because there's so many.
Yeah, we do. We have a campaigns manager role who looks after all of that. And it's funny, we work with some external agencies as well on a couple of bits and bobs in the mix, and they sort of come to us looking for that calendar approach and that sort of stuff, because it's kind of hard to sort of stay on top of it all, right? Like, there's so much with so many different niches that people are into and that sort of thing. So yeah.
Yeah, there's the big ones. Obviously, you could look for the Super Bowl in the US, and like you just mentioned, the few that in the UK. But I think that's cool. So the bettors that are in the states that you're available here in the US, are they also able to bet on the sporting events that are in the UK, or is it on a country by country basis?
It's, well, some. So things like horse racing wouldn't necessarily be available, but for gotcha. our customers in Indiana, they can definitely take advantage of Premier League prices and that sort of stuff. So yeah.
That's cool. Very cool. Well, you also mentioned something else, kind of looking at Robinhood and understanding that you love their product, or, look at their product as being kind of top of the top in this space. For the young marketers that might be listening to this podcast, what are a couple of other, whether they're actual marketers themselves or companies that you say, if you want to start learning about good marketing strategy, here are the brands that I'm also watching right now that I'm really liking?
Okay. Are we talking about like a Mount Rushmore kind of question now, or are we just a couple?
Sure.
A couple
And
things to follow?
it doesn't even need to be within the gaming space if you don't want, like if I just wanted to come and start to kind of watch strategy of certain companies that you love.
Yeah.
Who are those companies, or if it's a specific marketer that you're like, this marketer is incredible, they've killed it at every company they've been at. Yeah.
Okay, I'll give you two. So Marion Lee at Netflix, right? And that's like fairly obvious. I'm sure like she's on everyone's kind of list for this stuff. But Netflix, I think people are guilty of thinking that it's just like, oh, it's just a subscription model, it just works. But like, it doesn't. Like the challenges that they have to face day to day are incredibly huge in terms of they're also managing a load of experiential marketing. Like they opened up a show on the West End for Stranger Things and that sort of stuff. Like that is just so far removed from running a business that is like what you're trying to market a subscription model. And beyond that, like, you know, they're working on theme parks. And I think there's a really interesting, I was talking to someone about this over dinner the other day, this idea that Netflix throws huge amounts of money behind some shows and that sort of stuff. And obviously from almost a product roadmap point of view, marketers will kind of almost blend their mix around that. But then something completely from left field will capture people's attention. So like the show that you spent millions of dollars on suddenly is a bit of a failure, but you've got this like low budget reality series that everyone's really into. So you basically have to pivot your whole marketing strategy and product roadmap to then kind of cater for boosting engagement on that. So yeah, I think that's really, really interesting. And it's, you know, they did a keynote very recently where Marion spoke about it. I think that's really, really worth listening to, because for me, I think it's important that a lot of people understand that it's not as simple as sitting down in January every year and planning out your marketing strategy. Like you have to be able to pivot. And that's particularly true post-COVID in this world where, you know, you can't necessarily rely on traditional means from traditional channels. Like you have to be able to kind of use the performance mix and rely on kind of quicker changes and being more agile. And I suppose another example I would probably cite is Chris Davis at New Balance. So like New Balance are a really interesting brand. Like I remember kind of walking around as a, you know, stroppy teenager being embarrassed, like with my dad wearing their products and stuff, right? Yeah, totally. But like, you know, I'm guilty. I don't know how long Chris has been in the business, but you certainly look at what they've done recently around the ambassador program. So this kind of aligns a bit with what I was talking about earlier on. So they were first on Coco Gauff. They were first on England International, Bukayo Saka. And they've basically just transformed that brand from being like a dad trainer to like just pure FOMO. Like, you know, you need cool these trainers. Yeah, completely. Like very hipster and that sort of stuff, which is awesome. And I think, you know, the way in which they've leveraged influencers and ambassadors and that as a strategy, it's just like is awesome. And that's the way it's kind of changed that brand. It's been a massive turning point for them.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a really good example. I absolutely remember making fun of my husband in college. He had a pair of gray New Balances that I was embarrassed by completely. It was like, these are just so ugly. And now I'm like, New Balances are so cool. They're truly like, they look amazing. Yeah, you've got guys like even Shohei Ohtani, I think, is a New Balance guy. I mean, some of the best in their industries are wearing New Balances. And there's so many versions of even other sneakers that are trying to look like New Balances.
Totally.
So I completely agree.
Yeah, it's funny. And look, like their whole Q2 campaign was based around grey days, right? Like that pair of grey trainers that like everyone's had at some point, right? It's a really interesting brand, and just that way that you can kind of transform how you're perceived through kind of athletes and leveraging personalities, I think is incredibly important in today's world. I mean, you had Alex on from Better a couple of weeks ago, right? And you know the way that he spoke about, you know, the Jake Paul and that sort of stuff, FaceTiming people, like the brand's built around him, right? It just shows you how powerful that can be in the right situations.
Yeah, completely agree. I also think that's where, you know, a lot of us are so lucky to be within marketing. Like, how cool is it to have a job where we get the opportunity to change that brand voice or make people see products in a different way? It's just, what a fun challenge.
No, totally.
So I want to get to those fast question rounds. We're coming up here to kind of our 30-minute mark. Are you ready for some of these quick rapid fire questions? Just whatever first thing that comes to your brain, throw it out there. Okay.
Okay. Let's go for
it. Okay. Person, dead or alive, that you'd most like to sit down to dinner with?
Oh God. I'd have dinner with David Beckham. I've got a couple of questions.
Love that. I would also like to sit down to dinner with David Beckham. What is your favorite city in the world?
Favorite city in the world? Probably Barcelona. It's where I proposed to my wife. So I kind of have to say that.
Beautiful. You're a romantic. Okay. Because you're within the space, and obviously we talked about you liking to bet in the past, just kind of as a hobby. What's the dumbest bet that you've ever made? that you can never live down?
No, there are too many to remember, to be honest with you. I
And
just couldn't
any
even.
really good bets that stick out in your mind?
Oh, I mean, there's been a couple of Cheltenham horses over the years that have been very memorable. But yeah, I'll sort of stay on the outskirts of that one from a
Okay.
responsible gambling point of view.
We're pleading the fifth there. That's totally fine. Okay.
Yeah,
In 30 years, what do you think people are going to be nostalgic about?
David Beckham.
Good. They can watch his documentary.
Yeah,
Um, what's the worst advice that you've ever been given?
that's an incredibly good question. I don't know that I've ever necessarily been. Is there such a thing as bad advice? Like it's purely down to you perceiving it, right, or the way you perceive it.
I think that's maybe your answer right there. If somebody on your team had to describe your vibe or your energy via a cocktail, what drink do you think you are and why?
Old fashioned because I refuse to use hair dye.
That's okay. There's nothing wrong with going salt and pepper. Do you have any totally random skills or hobbies that have nothing to do with work or what you currently do for a living?
Um, Probably CrossFit. I'm a sort of big into the functional fitness space, and that has well, I suppose
Nice.
it kind of has a tie-in with sports betting, but in a weird way. But yeah,
It does. Do you do like the competitions and everything? You go that far?
I'm definitely not up to that level, but it's people talk about a kind of a place to escape. That's probably it for me.
That's awesome. No, that's okay. I cannot even do one pull up. Um, what's one thing that your past self, let's say 10 to 15 years ago, would be shocked to learn about your life today?
I think it's probably that transition from music to sports betting. And I suppose kind of the story there is, don't ever write anything off. Like you'll always end up in kind of weird places. And you're kind of be pushed out of your comfort zone, but you just have to kind of embrace it and make the best of it and see where you end up.
Yeah, I love that. Last question. If you thought anyone else should be on the podcast, who would you want to hear from and who can we invite?
I mean, like I said before, I'm a massive fan of Marion Lee. Like I would love to hear from Marion Lee on here.
Amazing. That's it. That was easy and amazing. Thank you so much for giving us some of your insight. And we were excited to, chat with you. And I know that our listeners are going to kind of love learning a bit more about Smarkets and SBK. Where can they find, if they wanted to follow you, but then if they also wanted to follow Smarkets and SBK, where can they find you?
So you can get SBK at betsbk.com if you're in the correct jurisdiction, and likewise smarkets.com. And you can find me on all the usual social platforms. LinkedIn's probably the best bet these days. I try to keep a lower profile on the likes of IG and that sort of stuff. But yeah, get me on LinkedIn.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Adam. We appreciate you being here.
Thanks so much, Hayley. Cheers.